Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Act Populi podcast. My name is Guy Fawkes, and I'm here with my anti-monarchist co-conspirators.
Catholics.
Yeah, because the Catholics didn't they?
Yeah.
Wasn't yeah?
But
Yeah,
enough of
they were
history.
Catholics. That's
I'm
right.
Jay,
And I'm Tom.
and today we've got a guest who is the king, as I should say, in the House of Parliament. Luckily escaped our fire. Hello, Archie.
Hello, great to be here.
Okay, okie dokie. So I don't know. A good way to get into the podcast, maybe we'll be talking about recent events of the monarchy. That being the Meghan Markle scandal. What's your views on that, Archie? Or, perhaps just set out your views of the monarchy as a whole.
Well, overall, I'm quite a supporter of the monarchy. I quite like it as kind of the golden thread which holds our nation together, as I think Jacob Rees-Mogg excellently put a while ago. I think it is a brilliant institution. It kind of binds the whole being of our sense of identity and provides a very useful oversight, kind of quite constant head of state leadership to the country.
Okay. And what are your pressing views on the Meghan and Markle scandal of a few months ago?
If you couldn't guess, I'm not from my previous statements. If you know about me, I'm not a fan of Meghan Markle whatsoever. I think the interview is definitely we don't know what's true and what's fake. We've already had confirmation that quite a few things she said are fake, such as the wedding, which she supposedly had 3 days before the big ceremony that cost the taxpayer quite a few £1 million, and it'd be quite a scandal for her to then say, actually, well, we took that money from the taxpayer. No, we were already married before. But it turns out that was total nonsense. The Archbishop said, no, I didn't marry you those 3 days before. That never happened. And she said that the very person that had married them, and that was obviously fake. And you can't marry someone without witnesses. So it was very controversial from the start. I think Oprah Winfrey, who was the interviewer, was kind of just being over sensational on the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you think that the the main issue with the ceremony that because the Archbishop gave kind of a mock ceremony, didn't they, missing out canon laws and things like that she didn't understand, and there's the bit in the interview where she goes, "Oh, I didn't know I had to curtsy to the Queen." And these are like obvious things, and we as a British audience are like, well, how did you not know that? How stupid of you. But perhaps we could move past these kind of relatively menial things and looking at, isn't it terrible that she wasn't welcome in the royal family?
I'd say she was pretty welcome within the fact the family, again, from what I've read and experiences of people who have been very close friends with the family, they are very opening. They are kind of universally, they accept a lot of people. And I think she said she didn't get support, she didn't get any etiquette advice, but again, that was then fake. It was false. Someone actually came out, one of the old ladies in waiting said, no, she actually helped train Meghan Markle to have all of that royal protocol in place. So I think the royal family were perfectly welcoming towards her. She just is a bit devious, in my view.
Right. So you kind of
go on, Tom.
Okay, sure. So you see like Meghan Markle here is kind of disrupting some like natural order with like a kind of like almost ignorance. Would you say that's fair? You think that she's came into this kind of society that she doesn't fully understand with like maybe a sense of arrogance? Would that be fair?
That probably would be fair, yeah, in a way.
Right, okay. Jack, what do you think?
Well, along with the reports of the not being taught the royal etiquette, there was also the rather controversial theme of one of the members of the royal family asking what colour the baby's skin was going to be, if I remember correctly. Does this indicate perhaps a rooted, perhaps institutional, either like direct racism or maybe indirect racism, because they are so elite? It's just second nature to them to be a bit racist.
Perhaps so. This is one of the questions we actually had offered in. Hi, big fan of the podcast. This is Tom Keaveney. And his question rather simply was, are the royal family racist? And I think it clearly is, isn't it? it's an embodied racist institution, prejudice institution. That the idea that it's completely hereditary and completely on product of what their father was. I don't think there's any space for saying it isn't a prejudicial family or a group of people. I think in the words of the monarchy itself, it is a prejudicial institution.
Mhm.
You seem to be
Apprehensive.
I wouldn't say that in its instance it is a it is prejudiced against any form of race. It's being very accepting again with the Commonwealth and building up those relationships with other Commonwealth countries and kind of reinventing itself as a modern monarchy, which is very accepting and trying to be more down to earth. We see Prince William meeting many people, and they do many engagements across the year. You don't see any forms of racism within that. Sometimes you might have generational ideas, maybe said that, but again, there's no hard evidence that any of the royal family did say that. It's again anecdotal evidence from words.
No evidence
who said what?
There's no evidence pointing the otherwise, isn't it? There's a clear evidence that she says that a member of the royal family have done that. There's no evidence saying they haven't.
Innocence until proven guilty is what I'll quote. It can't. It hasn't been proved, so I can't see guilt.
Archie, in a response to your claim of the monarchy isn't racist because it spans all these many different countries, couldn't there be a case to be made where they are racist because they span these countries and they force their own ideals upon them, erasing perhaps their own culture? Like in 1975, Australia had their constitutional crisis, wherein one of the people of power in Australia, whose powers were bestowed upon him by the monarchy, basically just dismissed the Prime Minister of the time.
The Governor General, yeah.
The Governor General, Sir John Kerr, dismissed Gow Whitlam, I think.
Who's the Prime Minister of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It seems like comparing the Commonwealth to the royal family is a completely different kind of look, these are colonies that we once had. We're not racist, we promise. Doesn't feel like a very good retort for accusations of racism.
Well, it's interesting you point to kind of the historical forms of the monarchy, because I'm sure you'd agree that the current members of the royal family weren't in the former instance related to kind of the colonial identity of wiping away the culture. They're kind of trying to rebuild that up. It is a contentious, I think.
I think Prince Philip was a keen imperialist in his day with India and all of this.
I mean, it's not there when they first were like invading these countries, but someone can change over time. You know, there were in those days kind of the strong British spirit that we ruled over a third of the world's landmass, and that was kind of very proud that our island nation had achieved that much. And whether that's obviously now in hindsight we recognise we cannot just go over with a strong military force to just barge into a nation and say this is now British soil. But I don't think that really means that the British family is institutionally racist. It's not. They're not going in because they see the kind of we don't like this race. They're just saying, well, we want the land.
But don't you think the evidence disproves that there's never ever been anyone other than white in the royal family, and the one time they come in, they are immediately accused of kind of accusations of bullying against them? Doesn't that somehow represent a kind of prejudicial, surely racist attitude within the family?
I mean, go on, Archie. But to play devil's advocate, because we can't just all pile on Archie. It could be said that the reason why there haven't been any people other than white is because it is hereditary. You know, it would be like unfair to say that this system of like hereditary, like passing off power, like should have like or it's bad that there isn't somebody of a different descent in it. because it is just one descent that is hereditary.
Yeah.
So it's a
It's
bit
hard to
unfair
judge, I
to
think.
say, yeah.
Well, on the
Go on, Tom.
monarchy, like obviously there's a lot of hearsay back and forth on a lot of like the racist attitudes that the monarchy may hold or may not hold. On one hand, you've got Meghan's accusations about concerns over the colour of her baby. On the other hand, like I'm sure most royal family members, if asked, would clearly say no. And the problem being, without any evidence to back up any claims apart from like testimony from people who like, and to be fair, Meghan probably has a lot to gain from painting the royal family in a negative light because of her current, predicament with them, her falling out. The more negative the royal family looks, the better overall like she looks. So I suppose like all we can really point to are like a lot of historical facts. At the end of the day, as much as we could say the current royal family aren't related to the same colonizers of the past, in a very literal way, they are related to the colonizers of the past because it's obviously it's not the same dynasty since the birth of the British Empire. It's they still span from the same roots, same family since the 40s and beyond that point. It's very much these people harbor these views and ideals, and we can talk about how they've progressed, but by keeping them on this pedestal as part of the monarchy and giving them this power and putting them as a British quote-unquote institution, surely they have no incentive or reason to change their ideals or like any regressive views, because really they embody this regression because like they kind of fly in the face of like a meritocracy. They fly in the face of anyone can get anywhere through just like your work, because at the end of the day, on some sad level, they're born better, or at least that's what we seem to give them. If we want to talk about a figurehead for the UK, we've given the UK a figurehead of people that are just born better than everyone else, and that to me seems wrong.
Well, I'd argue that they're not necessarily born better than everyone else, but they are trained from the age of you're adopted from when they're born. They are then brought up in the instance that they are there to serve. Their whole life is there to serve the country, and I disagree that it's going against maybe the ideals of a meritocracy, because we see the royal family, they don't have very much actual power. They're there as a figurehead and kind of to ease the transitions between governments. They're there as the head of state, like a president system in a republic. The prime minister has more power. So we see in the kind of UK governments, the government is made, and that is meritocracy, because they can work from nothing. You can become prime minister of the country.
Well, obviously, this is kind of an idealistic state to view the UK as. This kind of it's obviously kind of a democratic aristocracy rather than an actual meritocracy. But that's not the case. The monarch still has the most amount of power in the country.
The Queen's consent.
The Queen.
At the end of the day, that's a real scandal that happened, affecting like 2,000 laws over the course of her reign. That's a very real power that she's been able to abuse.
I would say in the relation to kind of her constitutional power, there's only so much that she can actually do. Lots of it is mainly ceremonial. She will appoint the prime minister who has confidence of parliament. She's not going to suddenly say, well, I'll appoint this person from, let's say she can appoint the Green Party as the PM when they have one seat in the Commons. No, but she has there's a difference, I would say, between the ability to and kind of the powers to and actually be able to do it. If she did that, there would be constitutional uproar. There would be kind of big backlash against her.
Yeah, well, the issue is that she has bypassed 1,600 laws on agriculture.
But how many has she passed? She's passed many more. If you look at a tiny percentage, those probably affect. I think most of the laws which she strikes down are those which directly affect her family. And I'm sure.
Why is it fair that a citizen born there just because of who their father was has the ability to literally control the entire democratic system of the UK, the House of Lords and the House of Commons?
If we want to talk about it
the
as
whole legislative system of the UK.
Yeah. If we look at it as like, theoretical power at the end of the day, then why don't we strip it away? If it's just theoretical and it's just ceremonial, she shouldn't have it in the first place. If it means nothing to our system, then why do we even like entertain the thought that she has it?
Well, if you look at what would replace her, it would mainly be in like the instance of like look at the US, which is a federal, has a presidential system where the president is the head of state, but Congress passed all the law. That's effectively maybe slightly different on a tangent from the UK, and the president you could equivalent to the Queen. The president in the US strikes down laws which affect him. He strikes down many more laws. He has lots of vetoes. His executive powers. That's what we would be mainly probably putting in place. You look at Germany, their president has then a lot of power. And they pass all those laws. So the legislature, that position still goes to someone. But rather than it being of a neutral figure, of someone who is independent from government, who is non-partisan, who doesn't appeal to a law just because it's right-wing economics or left-wing economics, she's beyond all of that. She puts in the law of what the Parliament votes through, in most cases. So you'd be putting that power to someone in a party position, and that's kind of I feel would be worse for us.
So, like, you believe the Queen has a place in like a republic instead of a constitution governing what the elected bodies can do. There's this outsider figure, which you would think the Queen should be. You think the Queen should be that outer figure, the figure outside of politics to look into it and govern what's happened and protect the rights of those that aren't the majority.
I think she's there as not as a outside, not there to govern. She's there to kind of steady the hand and the tiller of the country, if you can use a boaty analogy. She's not there to govern, but she's there as a independent observer almost. And I think that's much better to have someone outside of the very kind of toxic political system we see. And that's the benefit, I feel, of a constitutional monarchy, which kind of at the heart does aid for easy transition between many governments, and it keeps the country not swinging so much, but rather quite steady.
If we think of monarchy kind of holistically as a whole, surely when the Queen dies, there could be anyone in place. I'm going to read you a quote of mine. This probably backs up Archie's point more than mine. Monarchy is like a sleek craft. It sails along until some bumbling captain runs it into rocks. Democracy, on the other hand, is like a raft. It never goes down, but damn it, your feet are always wet. So what I think the issue here is that when the Queen does eventually die, we don't know what Prince Charles will be doing. The whole issue is that there's a massive power imbalance within the monarchy and within the very constitution of England that allows someone to control the laws just based on their whoever their father was.
Also,
if we go back all the way, I don't know if you've read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which is a massive scathing of the monarchy, and it led to the eventual America independence declaration. He realizes how terrible the monarchy is. I'll read it to you now. There is something exceedingly ridiculous in the composition of a monarchy. It first excludes a man from the means of judgment, yet empowers him to act in cases where the highest judgment is required. The state of king shuts him from the world, yet the business of a king requires him to know it thoroughly. Wherefore the different parts, by unnaturally opposing and destroying each other, prove the whole character to be absurd and useless. The idea that we have to kind of hide away the king, and then he has to view and have how do we know that he is a non-partisan view? How do we know that the monarchy will be unbiased? We see in history countless times king have gone against the rules of parliament and have been very, very biased towards certain viewpoints. I think it's too risky to play, oh well, the Queen, she's not going to do anything, but how do we know from that? The issue I have is that the Queen is able to do that. Even if she doesn't do that, I think the fact that she's able to bypass, as she has, 1,666 laws, the ability that she has to do that has no place in modern day democracy. That's my...
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned there's no place for the Queen to strike down laws, but let's say you had a presidential system. The president can still strike down the same laws.
A president elected by a body.
So the people have gave him the ability to do that.
4 years.
I feel like in a way we haven't given the Queen the ability to do that. We've begrudgingly allowed her to keep this ceremonial power, possibly because, that's the system we're in. And I suppose...
And the issue is it's not ceremonial either.
Yeah, because in that case she had used it. I suppose if the Queen was a completely neutral figure who stepped outside of everything, then I could really understand where you're coming from. But I feel like everybody has these inherent biases, and it's almost impossible to really get people to lose them, if you know what I mean. What do you think, Archie?
Well, I agree. There's always going to be some sort of inherent bias to whoever you have. You can never get rid of it. Even though we like to see news networks like the BBC, we like to say are impartial. There's always some sort of bias within it. We saw that when they, I think, laughed at the British flag, and I can't remember who was going off. Like the BBC is so biased, they must be defunded. But they are. There's a level of bias on both sides. But I do think kind of those powers resting with maybe someone with bias, it does kind of act with an insurance policy. She's more well versed in the British Constitution than I think nearly anyone in the UK, and she can stop actions which are against the Constitution with that power. So I think it's kind of it's useful to have someone independent outside of any sort of political system to act as an insurance to the being of our country.
Yeah. I can see that, but I would wonder whether or not it's right for that to be a position passed down hereditarily. I don't know. I think I would take issue with that, because if we want to talk about this figure who like understands the Constitution, I think that's all well and good, and that it makes sense to have like some kind of like unbiased outsider. But I don't know whether or not that should be a role that's passed down just because of where you're born, because I'm not sure if that feels like to me as if that like just fly in the face of like a meritocratic system, where you can just be born into a position as opposed to earning it, really.
Suggesting, sorry, Tom.
Carry on.
Because she owns probably 7 odd palaces all around the country, and she has loads of land and farms and all of these things. To suggest that she's unbiased, some massive tax reform comes in or something like this, we can't expect her to be like, oh, well, I don't mind. Go ahead, what you want to do.
Well,
I think she's obviously going to have some ingrained biases.
She might be against. She might be against the tax reform, but there's been reforms in the past. You see, Conservatives having low tax originally, and then suddenly a Labour administration, I think like Wilson, brought in very high taxation. She still allowed it perfectly to go through. She's been very open that monarchy used to not be able to, didn't have to pay tax, and she said, actually, no, I want to be treated as everyone else. I'll pay my tax. So she's made a point of reforming the monarchy to show, and actually, no, we want to be more like the people. And the whole point is the monarchy is trying to become more relatable, to kind of evolve with this modern era.
Like at Christmas, sitting in front of a gold piano, telling how horrible all the struggles are.
So the point is that right now we have a fairly good monarch, right? We don't know what's going on underneath the scenes, but it looks like we have a fairly good and understanding monarch.
Yeah.
Do we all partially agree with that, at least?
I'd accept that Queen Liz is doing pretty well as far as public opinion goes. Yeah.
But
no.
Okay, right. Okay, Jay.
Ingrained.
Like that.
Ingrained.
We're just going to ignore you. So our problem is that let's say we didn't have Queen Liz. We had some crazy person that had the powers of a
Prince
monarch.
Charles, maybe.
Yeah, Prince Andrew, maybe.
Well, yeah.
But yeah.
Half convicted paedophile.
Mm-hmm.
If we had someone like that in charge, that would obviously be a much bigger problem than Queen Elizabeth II, and that's where our main problems stem from: the fact that they can do this stuff.
And do.
Yeah, sometimes.
I suppose you always do run the risk of having one monarch which is kind of indisposed in a way. We saw that in medieval times, maybe with like Henry the fifth was more indisposed. He was a very, very weak king and fell into catatonic state, was very heavily controlled by his allies. But again, that's the old age, and I suppose now we'd see the monarchy, they almost trade into that role, and I think, at least for the succession, we have quite mentally stable monarchs. Maybe when we reach the age where we have a unstable monarchy, where they're very prone to mood swings and striking down very useful laws and trying to get outrageous ones passed. The thing is, the good thing to remember is they can't pass laws on their own. They need to have it proposed by the Commons, then go through the Lords, and then to them. So ultimately, the only real power is striking down laws. And as long as we already have laws in place, I think then the Parliament could suggest a reform to their powers if they were abusing them, which is quite
is that a power they should have in the first place, though? And while we can say that they don't have the ability to to create laws with that much influence and that much money, I think it would be just a bit naive of us to say that they don't have a hand in a lot of lawmaking in like in current day. At least that's what I'd say. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think, okay, monarchy, as Charlie pointed out, not Charlie, Archie. Oh, it is it is in most respects an ancient institution, right? The Bible condones it. The Bible says there is no place to monarchy. However, it was very common in medieval European states, and as you say, in England with all the Henrys. But surely, if we want to pose ourselves as a modern day liberal democracy, socially mobile liberal democracy, where you're not constrained by whoever your father was and whoever and whatever family lineage you're from, having this at the top of our institution, a 1,000-year-old family that have controlled the country for since the days of William the Conqueror, and having this at the top, like, you cannot get above this hereditary. Surely that's utterly, as Tom said at the start, flying against these ideas of social mobility.
I suppose it does almost fly against these necessary the ideas that we've perceived of the social mobility in some respects, but in others it provides continuity, which I think is the main point of the whole crux of the argument. Is it provides continuity between governments, and we don't need to have you can never have a total social democracy. Life will always depend on kind of who you know. If I know someone, let's say in a business, I'm more likely to go and get that job if I apply for it because I know the person. It's all about it's very tactile. It's all about connections and who you know. So we never reach that full social democracy with total equality of opportunity. And that's not maybe something which we don't need to necessarily strive for in respects, because you can never remove it. You can't remove those inherent biases. Let's say I'm friends with someone and I don't know the other person. They've got the same qualifications.
Nepotism,
I'd hire the person I know because I trust them. It's kind of that.
Nepotism.
Exactly.
But the thing is, it should surely show that the royal family having this is a perfect barrier to stop people saying, "Oh, this is the highest rank you can get in Britain," and they got there from what their father was. That may not affect any of us, but I'm sure it affects some people in the country who are told that, oh, you can get wherever you want. This is a modern day meritocratic state. And yes, there is some chances of nepotism, and that does plague society. But if we kind of want to eliminate, not fully, just say it'd be impossible, but just think a step towards eliminating that would be eliminate sounds like James Bond, eliminating democracy. something like that.
Eliminate democracy. There we are. So a full absolute monarchy would eliminate this democracy. But even if you look at, let's say, a system which doesn't have a monarchy, like the USA, you couldn't say that was necessarily, even though the top job, anyone in theory, as long as they're above the age of 35 and were born in the States, anyone can reach that top job. The country is still heavily ruled by it's almost crony capitalism in a way. It's not true free market capitalism in any sense. You have very powerful figures like Rupert Murdoch, for example. He has an immense amount of power around the world to control policy, and I'd say he has more power than the Queen in the UK to influence the voters, because the voters will then vote for whatever they want. Influence from that.
I can see that, and that's an important point to bring up, the fact that, well, like, these people in these positions of power may have more than her. Well, that just feels like you're doing, but they are also bad, so why put the blame on these people? Because as bad as someone else is, there's always the case that, well, that doesn't take away from what they're doing. I think I'm sympathetic to the view of, like, this like symbol of, like, the country, of, like, this kind of like outside kind of like body, and I think that could be something very useful for any country. These kind of like as Plato would call them, like philosopher kings. People who are kind of like above and beyond and kind of understand better than like the average person. And while like I think in some ways, again, I'm sympathetic to that view, I'm just uncertain as if we should be passing that out hereditarily. Would you be happy with some kind of governing body that could fulfill the same role, but one in which people are either like elected or given the role based on merit, based on their knowledge of the Constitution, as opposed to, well, at the end of the day, where they're born.
I suppose I can definitely see your point of maybe not having necessarily a hereditary position, but replacing them with a government system or a kind of an overruling governing body does remove. Well, it does cost more. Ultimately it costs the taxpayer more. The Queen, bringing into an economic kind of fiscal argument with kind of in favour of the monarchy. The Queen makes money for our country. She is effectively a free, if you want to call maybe the president as a rubber stamp to the country, as I've previously said in other things. The Queen is kind of that free rubber stamp. She's a money making rubber stamp in a way. She passes the
Yeah.
laws. She kind of coerces. She appoints government. She does all the roles a president would. For making the country money. So I'd say that ultimately is a beneficial system to keep in place. I think she
Yeah,
brings
but this amount of money is
£500 million it brings to the country each year. I think it's the generally accepted statistic.
Yeah.
and it's 127 billion overall in tourism, so it's quite a minute amount.
However,
And do you think this minuscule amount is enough to keep an unelected official in, kind of branding this feudal system from 500
Like-
years ago? If you're gonna cite America as the capitalist system, surely we could class ourselves as kind of a feudal state with an unelected official in charge.
Well, I definitely class America as a form of capitalism, not necessarily the best form. We are.
I think all countries are capitalist, aren't they?
You could argue China is
majority of
sort of a.
Well, they call themselves communists, but I
Yeah.
think
China seems to work on a level.
free market is not
It's a
communist.
difficult one. Difficult one.
but to go on, Archie.
No.
Okay, right. To further corroborate on Jay's point, the argument about revenue from tourism is a very weak argument because we don't know how much the Queen itself makes in that amount, because that figure probably includes people going to the crown jewels, people going to see these cathedrals. Are they going to these places because the Queen has power in society, or are they going to these places because they're nice places to go to, or they're historically important places? And if the Queen was removed, I'm guessing a large figure of that money would still come to this country, because tourists don't come to see the Queen, because it's a very high chance they're not even going to see the Queen.
Ooh, you see that's where I would disagree. If you go into London and you go outside Buckingham Palace every single day for the change of the guards, you wouldn't have that if there wasn't the Queen. It's all that instance of monarchy, and it's looking up to kind of what we could be. It's always painting an ideal. The monarchy is always, first instance, painting an ideal to show what you can be. I think it's providing that level of hope, which I suppose it's an interesting instance. It depends if you want to have some sort of what you could call a meritocracy, although, as the thing is, you've pointed out previously, the UK government, you've said, is kind of still kind of an aristocratic democracy in a way. They have lots of money. But again, if you remove the Queen, you'd still then have that. It wouldn't be ultimately a meritocracy with that. So it's a difficult one, I suppose.
No, it wouldn't be a purely meritocratic state, but surely it'd be closer. I 100% agree with you, Archie, that that glorious 2% of our entire tourism would be probably like a lot of that would be lost if we didn't have the monarchy. But again, that's only 2%. I don't mean to be blatant with these figures, but at the end of the day, what is it worth? What is the symbol that people come to this country and they look at that symbol of the monarchy, and I don't think that's a symbol people should be looking up to. I feel like, to an extent, that symbol right there represents something kind of wrong with our country. I think that's a symbol that people are coming to, and we're making £550 million off of, that we shouldn't be in, because at the end of the day, it's unmeritocratic. It screams of aristocracy and screams of like a ruling class above everybody else. And I think that even if without them, we're still left with the Eton boys in charge. They're a little less bad than the Queen herself in terms of screaming of class and privilege.
And also at least being elected as well. But I'm sorry to Jack and Archie seem to be quite up on this idea that everyone flocks to the Buckingham Palace to see these guards changing, but more people go to Chester Zoo each year than they do to Buckingham Palace. It's really not. It's a lot of. I think that you always see these pictures, don't you, about people or these tourists taking pictures of the guards. But perhaps this is just kind of a misconception, because looking at the statistics and figures that Tom's shared, it doesn't look like it's that much of
Yeah.
of a kind of a
It's 2%.
tourism.
And while that's still like a lot of money, that 2% still makes up like 550 million. And possibly the Royals bring in like 1.8 billion, according to like Brand Finance, or a company that like evaluate like brands worth, like they evaluate like Shell and Porsche. They're quite like at 1.8 billion is a. I'm not gonna sniff at that amount of money, but I don't see why that's like at least some of that money couldn't still be coming about the monarchy, and whether or not we should be putting a price and giving ourselves a, oh, if it's worth this much money, we'll let them stay. But if it fell under that, would we get rid of it? I feel like we're putting a price on our ideals.
Now, we've talked like a lot about money, but to play the devil's advocate, really, we would lose a really big portion of our culture and how foreign nations view our nation itself. I'm guessing by to other countries and like other countries' people, Britain is known for the Queen, for tea, and for crooked teeth, as well as waving Union Jacks.
Yeah.
So we lose at least a solid quarter of our culture by kicking out the Queen. So is that a loss that we're willing to take if people do really need, if people are really enthusiastic about culture tying people together?
I think the people must be enthusiastic by culture because the majority of the country, I haven't got the statistic directly on hand. I think from a YouGov poll,
I think it's 80%.
Support the monarchy. So should we be doing something, even if we had a referendum today, you'd have an overwhelming support to keep the monarchy. So I think that shows that we don't need to get rid of it. It is obviously appeals to enough people, even though I suppose 80% of the country aren't worth millions of pounds. That's like top 0.1% or something. And even those,
but if you,
it is, I guess, then democracy to keep it.
But if you educated the people, if you, first of all, doing a referendum will be completely against all kind of monarchic rules, and I would say, kind of, will kind of go against the idea of a monarchy that people have to vote them in each year. It's practically but I think. But would the statistic change if Prince Charles came in? And I remember reading on that statistic, yes, it would. I think it was around 40 or 50% if if Charles was king, and if you gave these people who voted an education about what the Queen is doing and the very idea of monarchy as a whole, yeah, we're not a nation of all ardent anti-monarchists storming the streets of Manchester every day, burning pictures of the Queen. But
thank
do you
goodness.
think if you offered this education towards them, they would perhaps change their views?
Well, I suppose then it is arguing is the British it's almost an argument, is the British public educated? I'd say they have education, they're perfectly well informed to make their own decision on the vote. And you can't take that away from them. It's almost I could argue I could educate them into wanting to work for free. If I wanted to brainwash them enough, I could make them all believe they should work for free. But providing them with equal facts is kind of looking at the biasing. You can't really remove bias ultimately from education, in my view. There's always going to be some form.
That is a very strong point. Sorry, Archie. Continue. I just
No. I'm done.
Yeah, that is a very strong point, and I do believe it is kind of fallacious by saying that the opponent's argument, the support for it can be eradicated by simply educating people. Because as Archie said, what is education if not brainwashing?
Pointing to the facts. Pointing to the facts.
So, Tom?
Tom?
Yeah, obviously people are going to be biased. We kind of have to accept that when we live our lives, people are filled with unconscious bias because of the environment they grow up in. It's impossible at the end of the day, as far as we're aware, as far as we can now, to remove that bias. But the more facts we can give people, the more of a reasoned idea we can allow people to have. Because we don't really, at school, like currently, or at least we did back when we were in high school, we did those life program British values classes where they taught us a lot about a lot about quote unquote stereotypical British values. And if we were to add something like monarchic about that, if we talk about the monarchy, pros and cons of it, if we were to just, I don't know, make this information, because it's there, obviously, it's there on the internet, but people a lot of the time, so for example, the Queen's consent law, the Queen consent scandal, 1,600 something laws. that was as well. There was like a Guardian article about it. It wasn't breaking news. I didn't see that on the TV when it should have been, because that's quite a shocking thing. If you ask a lot of people, they probably aren't even aware of it.
Well,
It
they
seems like
aren't, which is travesty.
yeah, it seems like the more all we I don't I, all we can do is give people more information to make informed decisions about. And if everybody had all the facts, and at the end of the day, people still had a referendum and still decided to keep the monarchy in place, then at that point that's the will of the
But then,
people. But then that right there, at that point you're electing them in, and at that point, is
Yeah.
it really the same hereditary
but
institution? And at
sorry.
that point, what would be the point of not just having
Mhm.
some kind of like outside body, as opposed to like this hereditary position?
If you want an unbiased person, why don't you just get a focus group in?
Yeah, but that
Give them a castle. Give them a focus group.
I mean, that's all very good, and that's all very good. But that argument of education also could be used against our democracy itself, which then, we can't use this because we can't fully educate everyone. Because just by saying education, it doesn't really mean much. It's like a bit of a pipe dream.
We can
It's a bit of a perfect state. But like,
do a damn
yeah,
sight better than we're doing
yeah,
right now in terms of
we
education.
definitely could. However, by saying that, by simply educating people, we can get rid of this imperfection to society. Because then, what is our democracy now? By saying that, do we accept that our current democracy isn't a democracy? Because it's based on the ignorance of the
I would-
masses.
Yeah, well,
Well,
because sorry.
All right. Sorry, I would probably say. I'll let you put in seconds, Jay. I would probably say that we don't live in a proper democracy,
No.
do we? We live in a place where we vote between two parties built up of educated Eton boys, and when we look at that, people aren't do we educate people enough about politics? Do we educate people enough about like the two-party system? Do people understand there's alternatives to that? A lot of people, when they cast their vote tactically, not for the party they agree with, but for the party they but for the lesser of two evils, so to speak, which colour tie they want in office for these 4 years coming up.
Yeah.
And that to me seems that's kind of like that flies in the face of democracy. And while I understand it's going to be almost impossible to completely educate people on these issues, I think there's no reason not to at least try and at least give people, like, I'm sure lots of people don't even know there's like a lot of people who don't even know about all the different voting systems that we could possibly use, like preferential voting. We could use like
Yeah, this is
vote,
kind of getting away from.
But-
yeah. But what I mean to say is, at the end of the day, we can be educating people about world affairs better than we are now. And on your point about what did you say? You said like, would we no longer be a democracy? Would we no longer be a democracy? Like, what if we did this like in favor of fascism or something, or like if we educated people away from democracy? At the end of the day, if you give people all the information and everyone comes to like a similar conclusion, there's a good chance that's probably a rational point. There's a rational like way forward.
So,
I don't know.
so there was this guy called Thomas Hobbes back in the day. You might not know him. He was very underground. But he said basically, Jay has his book, Leviathan, we flee voluntarily to this Leviathan who we give full power over our lives, because before that we lived in a state of nature which he described as being very bad and short. So are we the uneducated ones saying that, we need more freedoms, but we are ignorant of the fact that without a ruling power, our lives would be very bad? Is Hobbes' point a good one?
Well, yeah, this is the kind of age-old political philosophy, and we're kind of detracting here, maybe to the point of moving away from monarchy. I'm sure Archie has things to add on this about democracy as a whole. No, authority. Do we need a figure of authority over us? Thomas Hobbes, the great, I wouldn't call him great, but he was a great philosopher who pioneered lots of amazing ideas, is regarded as one of the founders of political philosophy. It was also in direct contrast to the great Genevan philosopher, and one of my favourite philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who argued that the state of nature, so there's two ideas, state of nature, but there's no authority over us, and it's just people being people. There is no figures, there is no organisations. Hobbes argued this will be solitary, poor, nasty, Brutus, and short, was the quote he gave. It would be anarchy, people would be fighting, constant war-like zone. Rousseau argued differently. He grew up in Geneva, and he saw this kind of superficial materialism kind of masquerading all the way around the town, and he absolutely hated it. And he said, in the state of nature, there would be peace and there would be calm because there would be no authority ruling over it. And these are two kind of contrasting ideas that they both had. So we could relate that to authority, definitely. I don't know if you've got any views on that.
Well, I can see kind of Rousseau has an interesting point there, that if we return to a state of nature, we wouldn't have a form of authority. But I still think if you go back to, like, let's say, tribal aspects and what anthropologists can garner from little evidence they have on kind of how tribes operated, you had elders of the tribe, you had that figure of authority, and with age came more authority. So I do think that statement is kind of erroneous within a point. But if you look at kind of what Hobbes said, I do agree that there is a necessity for some form of authority to have. In the olden days, we had, in the medieval times, we had the church, the Catholic Church had massive authority. It still does over a lot of different issues. But that level of authority allows the country. In the UK, we have laws, and it allows for those laws to be passed. It allows for murder not to be happened. If we suddenly had no authority, I could go out and shoot someone, and there's nothing to stop me. There's nothing to stop me going out and just stealing everything. And yes, if the people banded together to stop me doing that, surely that itself is some sort of authority against me. So there's always going to be a level of authority, and there always, I think, is a need for that authority to exist.
Yeah.
But before that authority to work to stop murder happening, there's no need to have an unelected figure at the top who has no education in politics.
I think there needs to be a clear figure, personally, just for continuity. We have 8 billion people in the world, and we won't all agree on something. Otherwise, you'd have different policy implemented in different areas. You'd have one town having a law for murder, one for against. It's providing a continuity over a large area.
But this continuity isn't needed, is it? If we look at Germany, France, America, they have had no continuity, have they, since the revolutions, whenever they took place?
Well, they still have an elected figure at the head. They still have that figurehead.
Who changes every 4 years. Britain would have that. I'm not suggesting that there would be. Well, Boris would become it if there was the Queen was.
Well,
the monarchy was dissolved.
I suppose that depends on what you replace it with, because Boris is part of the kind of what you call the lower legislature. He's part of the executive, not as the presidential above. If you look at Germany, which is a republic system, I think it would be more favoured in kind of contrast. Has less contrast with the UK system. The president is elected differently to the parliament, because you can't have the parliament. It can't be a kind of unibody almost. Boris is elected as parliament. He passes the laws, and no one can stop him. He's almost that, like what Hitler did in the 1930s. He became this autocrat in form. He became the chancellor. The president died. And took over.
Yeah, but we're not suggesting, because that's not how it works in Germany,
not now,
France, or America now. So I don't think Britain resorts to that.
No.
I doubt we'd make the same mistakes that we.
Well, history repeats.
We'd probably know separate.
History repeats itself, so who knows?
If history repeats itself, then how long till we have the next King John? Then we need another Magna Carta. If history repeats itself, we've still got those.
How long until there's
Queens in play?
Or like the 1989 French Revolution. I think there's always time for revolutions against the monarchy. I don't know.
I think the monarchy on the whole, like, it has a lot of there's a lot of good it can do, as far as like a unifying figure, as far as like, you know, separating the executive and legislative branch, as far as in like having this like outside perspective, as far as like this tourism coming in, this 2% of like the tourist income, you know, possibly like worth like a brand worth like 1.8 billion, you know, part of our culture. These are all aspects that the monarchy, like, you know, is entangled inside of and becomes part of, and you know, we could make a case from that these are a lot of positive influences the monarchy has on us. But I think we need to look at what it means to be a democratic state, and we need to understand what principles we want to stand for and what we want to stand against, and whether or not the monarchy sitting inside this grey area is something we should put our support behind. While I can see like a lot of good that the monarchy can do for us, I would probably say that at the end of the day, that's not a democratic system, and we need to be able to base ourselves off of democratic systems, because that's like the way forward for a liberal democracy, like the one we supposedly live in right now.
But is there necessarily a necessity to? You can never have, in my idea, complete democracy. If you even look at like the Venetian system of government, which is an interesting one. They elected kind of the Doge to rule over them, and that had more power. You can never. I don't think there can ever be a true democracy in effect implemented because it.
But we're not suggesting creating a pure democracy, but we could make our democracy and meritocracy closer to that aim through removing the monarchy, would you say?
I don't think it really affects the aim. The monarchy doesn't. I would go against your earlier points of the monarchy striking down lots of laws, and that's necessarily. It was bad to do that because they didn't necessarily strike down the laws. They advised against before it even went to Parliament. But the monarchy, kind of with their vested interests, the monarchy tries to protect their own the private interests, not the interests of the country. And I think it is a beneficial system for our democracy. It provides that continuity, as my last point. It provides continuity. It provides kind of this overarching sense of unity and brings us ultimately closer together, which is, I think, what we need in this day and age, rather than the divisions we see within democracy, where we have the left and the right, and it's very, very polarised. We need this unity figure who's independent from all of that, and that's, I think, my point.
So the monarchy, when acting perfect, when acting as philosopher kings, when acting as perfect representatives of our culture, are good, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure if they are perfect, they are probably a good thing to have around. But the trouble is that they are, no one's ever perfect, right? No one's ever perfect. No one can be perfect. Perfection doesn't exist, basically. So our problem is that these monarchs can be bad, and they do have the ability to be and do bad things, which is undemocratic and bad.
And when that day appears, I would be for curtailing some of their powers. But until that day appears, I would be a strong supporter of it.
But it's too late. You're unable to. The monarch has the most amount of power out of any of the legislative branches.
The monarch can be removed.
If they can do that.
The Act of Parliament can be passed that the monarch is, I think it's like indisposed, or there's an incapacity to the monarch, and a regent can be appointed. So Parliament does still have to have that power.
But this is temporary.
Yeah.
This is temporary.
It could be appointed for that region of their reign. They could get a psychiatrist. They could go to the Supreme Court, which Tony Blair created. And I think the monarchy, ultimately, the institution can be protected from the acts of any kind of unstable mental state of a monarch.
But to the very fact that they have to make a law like that, doesn't that suggest the utter futility?
Well, you can have it with the presidency.
That the government are able.
The president could go mad within his first year, and then suddenly make all these powers and be autocrats. But the parliament reserves that power to stop it.
Yeah, but the president is elected, and the monarch isn't. That's I think the main issue with comparing.
But the president will have less overall support than a monarchy, statistically. And the president's very partisan with his views.
I'd just quickly on your point about deposing the monarchy, but if in the situation when one of them's unable to fulfill their duties or they went mad or what have you, I would say, why aren't we doing that already? The Queen has changed 1,600 and something laws. That's something she's done, outside of her own power. Her, as an unelected official, has went and meddled with affairs that don't concern her.
Those 1,007 laws, even The Guardian does state this, those 1,000 laws, if you're like an arbitrary figure, are affecting her directly. She only intervenes in laws which affects her.
One of them was about pension that hardly seems...
They are kind of vetted by the Queen in a process before they're approved by the Parliament, and they mainly include draft laws that kind of affect her personal property and anything deemed to affect her personally. I think that's quite right, that she can protect herself against that.
If a law affects me, I don't get to strike it down if it affects me. But the Queen's been given this special privilege.
Yes, because she's the head of state. She needs to remain a certain body above kind of interference from people in effect.
Does she need to remain to get free parking? Because that seems like a really arbitrary law that she changed. It just seems that it's an abuse of power.
She doesn't see anything unconstitutional.
We'll get.
I wouldn't say that the majority of the laws she passed. I've not read about that parking one in effect, so I'm not quite sure there. But the majority of the laws are mainly because of her private interests, which affects the monarch as an institution. Maybe that affects her estate as an institution for government, and she can, I think. I don't, the president, if he had, about the president and the office of the president was affected by a law passed by the lower legislature, I'm sure the president would equally say no. And the Queen does allow things which affect her interests to get passed if they're not so severe. I think it's mainly her advice she takes from independent lawyers which allow her to do that.
But I think it seems completely alien to me comparing, first of all, the Queen to the President, because I know they're both executive branches, but that's the only similarity they have. The Queen is not there on lieu of her merit or democratic reasoning, and it also seems completely alien to me that you're defending this kind of really anti-democratic idea that she's able to bypass laws that she doesn't want to happen. You said yourself she's meant to be an impartial, non-partisan figure that is cancelling laws that don't appeal to her.
Well, she's not.
We'd call that a conflict of interest, wouldn't we?
She's
her doing that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, but what she's doing is she's advising against the law. She's not stopping the law. The government could choose if they wanted to proceed and pass it through the Commons, and then she would be obligated to then sign it off with royal assent, because otherwise she'd face a constitutional crisis at the very heart. And these laws aren't massively important laws either.
It doesn't matter the importance of the law. I think it doesn't matter, but it's her very power that she's doing that. It doesn't matter what kind of stance the law takes. The power that she has to stop laws happening surely contradicts the very notion of a liberal democracy that we stand ourselves in.
I don't care what law she's changing. At the end of the day, she's changing laws.
Yes, I do compare her to kind of a president, because the powers of a head of state are likened to the head of state. When you probably replace it, will have some sort of head of state figure. So as a head of state, interests which affect the private office of the crown. She's the institution and the being of the crown, as well as being an independent figure of Elizabeth Windsor. That institution of the crown will protect itself. The head of state will protect the office of the head of state, because that's what she's there as a being, and she's there to serve the people. And in her actions, she's not striking down laws which have been passed democratically. She's advising against something before it even goes to the democratic process. And she's basically a lobbyist figure. You have many other figures in the country who will lobby against the government introducing certain laws, or lobby them to start certain laws. I don't really see much of a difference between her as a lobbyist figure in an independent sphere and then as the crown. They are two separate entities, but both the same person. It's complicated, the difference between crown and individual. But I'd argue they've done individual aspects.
The power that the individual has, as because of the crown, as product of being part of the crown, surely contradicts the notion of a democracy.
Then we aren't necessarily what you could call a full democracy. We're a constitutional monarchy, and those are the powers she reserves under that. And I think it works better, almost, than democracy, in a way.
Why? How?
Because, again, it provides continuity, having that figure at the top, to aid between governments. She's not doing laws which affect our lives, it's stuff which affects hers. And if we want to have a law change, we can go and lobby government the same way she's done.
Yeah, but we can't, though, can we? We
could.
Yeah, but she has the power to
She's
stop
got
any
more
law.
powers on Lewis
Yes, she
It's
has
not like
more.
any law that's made is given to the British people. Like, what do you want to do with it?
She has more. She has more power in interference. But if you think about it, the Prime Minister could choose not to pass certain laws the people want passed because it affects him.
Because we chose to elect him, and whenever a prime minister or a president, for that matter, on a law decides to change it based on personal interest, that is a conflict of interest, and we've had it. Well, that's why one of the reasons Donald Trump was being impeached in the first place, was because his businesses gave him a conflict of interest of being the president at the time. The Queen's, in a way, doing the same thing. So
there are always going to be conflicts. It's a difficult area. There's always going to be conflicts of interests, but I don't think there's a necessity to say the monarchy is bad because they have the power to strike down laws and they advise against laws. She's passed many, probably millions of laws in her time, or hundreds of thousands of laws. It's a very, very tiny percentage she's intervened on, where it's a matter
But she
of
she can do it.
interference.
That's the issue.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter how many she pass.
It-
It's in her power as a monarch to do that. That's
But-
terrifying.
But if the Parliament passed something and she said no to it, there would be uproar. So she wouldn't do that. There's a difference between having the ability to doing something and willingly doing something. I have the
Okay,
ability
then, so
to
if
hold a
it's-
gun
if it's
and
bad
shoot
that-
someone doesn't mean I'm going
So
to do it.
So if it's terrible that she never does it because Parliament can go over, what's the point in her having it then? Surely that these should be taken from her.
Because if a law goes against the Constitution, so let's say a law suddenly says we are taking away the right for people to breathe, and it's a ludicrous law, I know, she could then say that's not going to happen. Is that?
The Constitution
But what
doesn't
happens if the government opposes that? Like you said before, they can depose the monarch.
Well, they can depose the monarch if the monarch is incapacitated, but in that instance,
Or they could pass the law without the Queen's consent.
well, then surely it doesn't matter if they can pass a law without the Queen's consent. Then surely it doesn't matter if the monarch has
Precisely,
the
it doesn't matter.
permission.
Why do we have this woman deciding it when the government can
Well,
pass
you
it
just
without
said
consent?
if the government can pass it without consent, the argument that she shouldn't be there because she has the power to strike down laws is erroneous. Because you said
Yeah, so we have this
democracy.
figure here that we can easily bypass it. Why don't we just get rid of the figure?
Because it's harder to bypass the figure. It's like when you pass a law, it's easier to pass a law than it is to repeal it.
I don't
that's the
understand
statement.
why we think having this. I'm gonna do it in speech box because she's not non-partisan because no one can be non-partisan and she's not and she's unelected. I don't understand why it's fair at all to have this person who's there and what her father's father was, who was a extraordinarily rich woman who comes from an incredibly horrible family, deciding that what the laws of the country what they are, ruling over 60 million people. It seems alien to me.
She doesn't have much physical power, though. She's there as a figurehead. She's there to bring unity, and she's there as a ceremonial duty as a head of state to appoint prime ministers and dismiss them when they come out of office.
Aside from the legislative power that we just talked about, she's also head of the House of Lords, and she's also head of the Church in England, and she's also head of the whole judicial branch of the English government. It feels that she has an enormous amount of power that isn't necessarily ceremonial.
But it's not used. It's mainly done as a formality. If you look at royal assent, I think the last time it was refused was 1707. Since then, royal assent has not been refused at all. That's now regarded as a formality. She doesn't intervene in the justice system. She doesn't. That's not her duty. She's just there as a ceremonial duty to appoint, and she has that power to appoint these people. Otherwise, the ceremonial duty was pointless. Why is she there appointing these people? She doesn't have the power to do it. So she's there having the power, and the Lords Appointment Commission takes over most of the responsibility for putting people into the Lords. And the monarch in the past has stopped the Lords from stopping legislation. The Lords can be appointed by the Queen, and the Queen, I think it's an old king, I think one of the Georges, said the Prime Minister at the time wanting to, it could have been Robert Peel, I think at the time, wanted to pass a very controversial law. It wouldn't get through the Lords because the Lords kept on blocking it. So King George at the time said, "Nope, I will appoint as many Lords as is needed to get this bill through if the Lords do not change." And that's the power they reserve to respect and uphold democracy. I think they see as their main duty to uphold democracy.
Mm-hmm. Can we move past this? I don't think we're going to solve this issue to end, perhaps.
Yes.
We could have a question from Matthew Stowe, who asks, is it acceptable for the monarchy to use its power to shield Prince Andrew? Also a very topical question, another controversy that the royal family has embroiled itself in. What do you think about it, Tom or Jack or whoever wants to answer?
I mean, personally, yeah. At the end of the day, if like we're gonna sit there and see this man who's accused of pedophilia, still sitting the light of day because he's like a royal, it seems a bit. We can argue all day. We could probably argue about a while about whether or not how true his accusations are. But he's definitely had an easier time getting through them than the average person would have due to his royal status. I think the royal family, if I'm allowed to do a bit of a closing statement for myself on this whole thing whilst we're like in the process of wrapping up, and then I'll pass it on over to you guys. The monarchy, as far as a symbol and a moneymaker, can do a lot of good and can do a lot for our culture. But I think if it oversteps its boundaries in terms of this quote unquote theoretical power, or in sometimes very real power it uses, I would probably say that even if you want to sit here and say this power is ceremonial, then I would ask why we even go through the process in the first place, because at that point it just seems like some kind of pointless system. And if you look at it and say it's not ceremonial, but then we've got a real problem with our democracy. Either way, it seems to me that we're keeping the queen around based on like some monetary policy or due to some or just some cultural significance that she has. And really, again, like I've said from the beginning, I think it flies in the way of a meritocracy. At least that's my opinion. I'm going to pass it over to you guys for your own, I suppose, like answers to that question and closing statements.
Closing statements. Wow, Archie. We'll have Jack, and then Archie can wrap it up as our special guest.
Well, again, I think that the argument we're having is the paradigm of a perfect monarch, where they act as a foster king. They are just. They have a correct. They have an objective sense of a democracy and peace and what's good. However, our argument is that nobody can have a objective sense of these things because they can't be objective and nobody's perfect. So I think because the monarchy can't be perfect and because they have the ability to do wrong, monarchy is bad. So Archie.
In terms of my closing statement, I think the monarchy brings continuity to the country, it brings stability to the country, and I would say it does bring an element of impartiality to the country. And just because someone has the ability to do something bad doesn't make them bad in a sense. I have the ability to go out and punch someone in the face. It doesn't necessarily mean I will, and it doesn't make me a bad person having the ability and the power to do something. And I think the Queen overall is a great person. But I think when a time comes where we have a monarch that is indisposed of a kind of a mental state which is incompatible with our democracy, then it comes the time to look at what powers should the monarchy now have, or how can we curtail the impact of such figure on our kind of modern democracies we see. But I see that the Queen is no threat to our democracy, no real disadvantages to having her in power, and ultimately she's a money-making rubber stamp.
What an honour.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Archie. It's been a massive, massive pleasure to have you on. And
Oh,
our
thank
first
you.
guest, what's an
And
honour
then,
indeed.
yes.
Next week, we'll be talking about liberalism from John Stuart Mill to
And
Margaret
then,
Thatcher and
the week
Ronald
after,
Reagan
we are
themselves.
going to be hung, drawn, and quartered in the
Threats to
Traveller
liberalism
for
and all their days
attempting to blow
numbered.
up the
So, thank you very
Parliament.
much, Archie.
Oh,
It's
Thank
bye.
you.
Fun times.